Why PopOS is not the best beginner Linux distro. PopOS has built a reputation as the easy answer for new Linux users. On paper, that makes sense. It comes from System 76, it is based on Ubuntu repositories, it offers a separate Nvidia image, and it bundles a lot of convenience into the default experience. But that convenience can hide something important. PopOS is not really designed to be the most neutral, least surprising Linux system. It is designed to be opinionated, fast, and tightly shaped around System 76's own ideas. That is great for some people. For absolute beginners, it can also be a little much. The biggest reason is that PopOS is no longer just Ubuntu with a different theme. System 76 has been building more of its own stack around it, and the biggest sign of that shift is cosmic. System 76's current PopOS 24.04 release is in public beta and features the company's Rust-based Cosmic desktop. That tells you a lot about where the project is headed. This is an actively evolving platform, not a frozen, ultra-conservative beginner desktop. Innovation is exciting, but beginners usually benefit more from systems that have already spent years absorbing bugs, edge cases, and support knowledge. PopOS also leans hard into its own workflow choices. Its support docs show that tiling and window stacking are a core part of the experience, with keyboard shortcuts like Super+S used to stack windows. That can be fantastic once you learn it, but it is still one more concept a newcomer has to absorb on top of learning Linux itself. If someone is coming from Windows or macOS, they are already adapting to new app installation habits, new file system ideas, and new update behavior. Adding a keyboard-first window model on top of that can make the learning curve steeper than it needs to be. Driver support is another area where PopOS is helpful at the start, but can be less transparent later. System 76's own support pages note that PopOS includes the appropriate drivers by default, and the download page offers a dedicated Nvidia build. That is a real convenience, especially for people who have struggled with GPU setup before. The trade-off is that beginners may not learn much about how Linux driver management actually works under the hood, which can become a problem when a kernel update, graphics issue, or hardware quirk shows up later and they need to troubleshoot it themselves. PopOS also adds its own recovery and maintenance layers. System 76 documents a recovery partition, OS upgrade and recovery tools, firmware updates and settings, and repair flows for boot or login problems. That is good engineering and a good support story, but it also means the system is full of extra moving parts that are not part of the standard Linux vanilla experience many tutorials assume. A beginner often learns faster when the desktop behaves in the most ordinary way possible, because then the advice they find online matches what they see on screen. This is where Linux Mint often feels like the safer recommendation. Mint's own homepage calls it a friendly operating system, and its release notes emphasize long-term support. Mint 22 is supported until 2029, and Mint also highlights tools like its Update Manager and Time Shift snapshots, which make updates feel less risky. That conservative approach matters. Beginners do not usually need the newest desktop experiment. They need a desktop that is calm, well-documented, and predictable while they learn the basics. So the real argument is not that PopOS is bad. It is not. PopOS is polished, capable, and clearly built by people who care deeply about performance and design. The point is that good for beginners does not mean feature-rich or clever defaults. For some newcomers, PopOS will feel amazing. For many others, especially people who just want the easiest possible first step into Linux, a more conservative distro like Linux Mint is the better fit. PopOS is a strong Linux desktop. It is simply not the best default answer for every beginner.